Now I give the floor to Helena Dalli for the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Madam President and honourable members of this Parliament, the European Union and India enjoy a strong bond rooted in the 2004 strategic partnership. It is based on shared values of democracy, rule of law, respect for human rights, commitment to the rules-based global order, effective multilateralism and sustainable development. The President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission will host the Prime Minister of India for the 15th EU-India Summit on the 13th of March here in Brussels. We have with India a rich, frank and open dialogue on all issues of common interest, as well as on issues where we might have different perspectives. The High Representative, Vice President of the Commission, was in India on the 16th and on the 17th of January, where he discussed the preparation for the summit. On this occasion, the Minister for External Affairs and Prime Minister Modi reaffirmed their strong interest for a deepened strategic partnership with the European Union. The issue which you are debating today was also part of the discussions, and the HRVP inquired about risks of discrimination among refugees and migrants on religious grounds under the revised legislation, and he drew the attention of his interlocutors on the need to ensure compliance of the national legislations with the international law. Beyond this point, we believe that it is the role of the Supreme Court of India to assess the compliance of the law with the Constitution, and we are confident that the ongoing judicial process will contribute to appeasing the tensions and violence witnessed over the past weeks in the country. I thank you for your attention and I look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani komisarz.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And now on behalf of the EPP, Gahler. 2 minutes.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani przewodnicząca. Liebe Kolleginnen und
Dear colleagues, as the Commissioner has outlined, India is an important partner for us, economically, politically speaking. We want to improve ties. That's why it's important for us to understand what's happening in the country. And when it becomes clear to us that there has been an amendment or a change to the law, as is the case with the National Register of Citizens, then that is problematic. And if that then leads to violence and death, then we need to take a very close look. We're doing that in this context. We therefore need to be smart and assess the situation. The Amendment Act itself establishes a 12-year deadline for those who have lived in the country. It doesn't matter whether they're Muslims, Christians, or of another faith, but if they've lived in the country. So it's a kind of a selective privilege. It's a kind of positive discrimination introduced here. So one has to ask whether in this context criticisms can be levelled. The criticisms that I think is not a criticism in this context with the debate on this law is this debate on the registration of citizens being renewed. There's this fear that many citizens will not be able to prove that they actually are allowed to be in India. Well, of course, there needs to be clarity. Let's wait and see. Hopefully we can speak with representatives of the government in a fortnight at the next opportunity. And then we will also know what the judgment of the Supreme Court is. We think we should level criticism where it's appropriate.
And now on behalf of the S&D group, John Howard. 1 minute and a half.
Madam President, I find, and many of the people I represent find, the Indian Citizenship Act amendments alarming. This cannot be dressed up. This is a highly discriminatory piece of legislation which targets a specific religion. Muslims are singled out, and the threat that this legislation represents to the secular nature of India should be clear. And it's all very well asking the Indian government what's actually going on, what they think, but I don't believe this is necessarily a government that you can trust. I mean, they're going to say that it's okay. But the reality appears to me to be somewhat different. And the reports of violence that we hear from India are on the increase. And I think a message needs to be sent to the Indian government from the European Union, because this is a government of Hindu nationalism, a populist government out of the same mould that we have seen elsewhere in the world. And the message needs to be very clear. Whether it's Kashmir or the rights of citizens, respect for human rights is an essential element of the arrangements that this union makes with other partners. And without that respect for human rights, our relationship as a European Union with India will come under serious threat.
Thank you very much. And now on behalf of the Renew Group, Dinesh Dhamija. 2 minutes.
India takes in persecuted refugees from Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh, and they're the bad guys. They're the good guys. They've taken in the refugees. This motion does not censure any of the 3 Muslim countries for having created this refugee crisis. The UN Minorities Declaration of 1992 states that minorities can be classified as national, ethnic, religious, linguistic or cultural. This act, the CAA, is just focused on persecuted religious minorities seeking refuge in India. Thus, Muslims coming from the 3 Muslim countries cannot be considered minorities. Muslims do have a right to become Indian citizens by the 1955 Act, of course. The CAA allows Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Jains and Parsis and Sikhs from becoming citizens in 6 years of living in India. These are persecuted religious minorities. There are many things wrong with our motion today. I'll just give you 4. Rohingyas, Tamils, violence of the police, and the National Register of Citizens. Rohingyas are a religious Muslim minority leaving Myanmar for Bangladesh. When they come from Bangladesh to India, they become economic migrants because they're coming from a majority Muslim state. Violence and brutality of the police. Let me inform you that 57 policemen had bullet wounds in a demonstration in Lucknow. Tamils, they are an ethnic minority, not a religious minority. The National Register of Citizens not even mentioned in the CAA Act. Are we saying that India, or any other country for that matter, is not allowed to document the people living inside its boundaries? The CAA is in front of the Supreme Court and thus should be considered sub judice. The real reason for this motion has come before us, the India-EU summit. Should we not be talking to the Indians rather than criticising them, playing new colonial politics? I think we must have a debate, but must also have a summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Mr. Scott Ainslie, for 1.5 minutes. I would like to invite you all to stick to the time limits.
I am utterly heartbroken by the appalling decision that we have taken today to postpone the cross-party resolution on India's Islamophobic Citizenship Act, a resolution to which all the main groups had committed, but EPP have co-signed, but today have chosen to postpone the vote yet again. Now, faced with the pressure of India's diplomatic lobby, the EU have crumbled, capitulated, prioritising yet another trade summit with India over our commitment to protecting human rights. We've refused to take a stand on this Islamophobic policy, which could drive 200 million Muslims, nearly half the EU's population, towards statelessness, incarceration or deportation. In the state of Assam, 1.9 million citizens already have felt the curse of this nationalistic move by Modi. It's shameful. Now, many words were said in this chamber today and from your seat to say that the only thing necessary for triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Today, colleagues, we are doing nothing to protect the rights of Muslims, today's persecuted peoples. This will be the very last time I address the Parliament, but I want to leave you with a simple plea. Do not allow the Indian government to use its diplomatic and political might to buy itself impunity. Stay strong, principled, and fight against human rights violations and injustices. Speak truth to power and hold the authoritarians to account. But you must act. Words are not enough.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the ID group, Mr. Thierry Mariani, for a minute and a half.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Madam President, thank you. India is the biggest democracy in the world, and if you take into account its population, the government and the Prime Minister were elected and re-elected. Madam Commissioner, you tried to calm things down and say that there should be a partnership with India. Yes, indeed. And this law is going through a democratic process. It is before the Supreme Court that will decide whether it's constitutional or not. The vote was postponed because how would India interpret this vote? Imagine that we had voted against this law. Then afterwards, it would have been said that the Supreme Court was influenced by the EU. So I think it was sound to postpone the vote. And it isn't up to us to give our opinion. Each country is sovereign. As the EPP speaker said, nothing has really changed for part of the population. If you allow me this British expression, there's a fast-track process for certain people. In France, there's a fast-track procedure for people who come from certain countries that have shared our history at some point or who speak French. I don't think there's any type of persecution in this country or reflected in this law. Can we not see the hand of Pakistan pulling the strings behind this campaign? Pakistan flouts all international agreements and we still give them the GSP plus status. And the Christian minority is threatened in Pakistan. Let each country, each nation decide who to give their citizenship to, especially when they host thousands or millions of refugees. I think it's the countries of origin of the refugees we should blame.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the ECR group, Mr. Ryszard Czarnecki, for 1 minute. The floor is yours.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. We have just heard about the strong lobby. I believe that today in the European Parliament we see the lobby that is winning, the lobby of common sense and respect. The respect for one of the largest democracies of the world, our very important partner in Asia, an economic and political partner to the European Union. Respect and recognition for a civilization and a state which has never ever tried to meddle with our internal affairs within the European Union. As we talked about our treaties, we never had any comments from New Delhi coming to us here. So I believe that if we try to act as teachers or judges or prosecutors, this will not be the right way to go. We should act with respect. Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of the GUE NGL group, Madam Villanueva Ruiz, for 1 minute.
closing down the internet, repression, many people protesting against this law in India, which isn't in line with the secular nature of the constitution. It introduces ethnicity as a criterion, but it's also a flouting of human rights, as was stated by the UN High Representative. This law is in of itself discriminatory, but it also affects all. President Modi, like Trump, like Bolsonaro, is in his second term coming up with measures that will exacerbate the conflict in Kashmir, and we in Europe should be working alongside the thousands of Indians who are striking for their rights, and also by the side of women. This means that we need to improve human rights. We can have a dialogue on equal footing with this country, otherwise Europe itself is a...
Thank you very much. Now on behalf of the non-attached, Mr. Castaldo for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Despite the CAA, it seems that this is about welcoming and reception, but that is not the case. It's discriminatory and divisive. It gives certain rights to some and not to others. And then we also have the National Register of Citizens. The CAA could make a lot of people stateless, and it could lead to a lot of resentment and tension in the Muslim community. If this CAA were to protect persecuted minorities, why didn't it not include other persecuted minorities, the Rohingyas in Myanmar, the Bihari in Bangladesh, the Ahmadis in Pakistan, and I could go on and on with a long list. The EU's foreign policy is based on the principle of non-discrimination, and I'm very bitter that we took the decision to postpone the vote. We are elected representatives, and I condemn the Indian government's decision, and I hope they will reconsider the CAA and that they will repeal it. India gives a lot of cultural wealth and has a lot of cultural wealth and doesn't deserve it.
Thank you very much. And now Neena Gill for 1 minute and a half.
There's been much disinformation in the run-up to this debate, and even misleading statements in this House by some who've spoken before me, mixing up all sorts of issues. Now, let's just stick to CAA. This is an action of positive discrimination aimed at fast-tracking the integration process of refugees from Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh, who have already been in India for many years, recognising the high level of discrimination faced by non-Muslim in those countries. It is not seeking to exclude any of the other groups who do not fall within this category. They can still apply for citizenship and be processed. What really pains me, President, is that I have repeatedly raised the concerns around the persecution of minorities in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh, and only for them to fall on deaf ears. Had this House paid a little bit more attention to those gross violations, as we do today to CAA, India may not have had to take these actions. So I really welcome that the vote has been postponed on the resolution. First, it's full of factual inaccuracies. Secondly, it is right that we take time to have a proper debate, and this House waits until the Supreme Court has deliberated on this. And one thing we have to recognise, that India has a very strong civil society, and Indians are far more than capable of holding their executive to account without interference from those who know very little about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Shaffaq Mohammed for 1 minute.
Thank you. Earlier at the start of this session, we had a very powerful lesson in history, a lesson that's painful for this chamber because that's one of the reasons this came into being, where one group of people decided another group of people were going to become stateless. And I thought this chamber had learned that lesson. And I thought that we're going to be moving on. But what we see now, yes, you might say you're going to have your meetings and resolutions, but I say to you, I have tried so hard to get this resolution on the table. I postponed the last one. I sat down with all the groups and I thought we had an agreement, but we haven't. I'm going to be away from here now. I'll be gone. God forbid, if something terrible happens to that new group of people that are going to be made stateless, I can go away with a hand on my heart and say I did everything possible. But you know, individuals in here, from the top table downwards, thought business and trade interests were more important than human rights. Because that's what you've done today. Well done.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle. Głos zabierze pani.
Thank you very much. The president interrupts.
Mamy w ramach niebieskiej karty.
We have a blue card. A question.
Pytanie od
A question from Mr. Thomas.
Will you take the blue card?
Yes, sorry. Language issue.
Romanian language. Ați vorbit.
You spoke about the fact that an important group of citizens will become stateless. Could you tell us the exact number of citizens that will become stateless?
Dziękuję bardzo. Proszę udzielić odpowiedzi.
Thank you very much. Can you answer, please?
For taking the headphones off. If you looked at the motion in H, this NRC has been enacted in just one state. One state, and 1.9 million people cannot prove that they are Indian citizens. What on earth are you going to do with those people? Because there's already detention camps set up. That's why I say to you, remember your history. In Nuremberg, that law was also passed, and that was legal. Just because a law is passed in a parliament doesn't mean it's legal. Learn from our history. I am taking this home with me. I am going to hold this in my drawer. And God, like I said, God forbid, if anything happens, those people that stop this vote today, I'll be publicly naming them and saying these are the people that are led to this tragedy.
Dziękuję bardzo. Głos zabierze pani.
Thank you very much. Now Anna Bonfrisco for 1 minute.
Grazie, signora.
Thank you very much, Madam President. High Representative. The European Union has always had strong trade ties with India, but also has to acknowledge the fact that it is building and defending the rule of law. But there are a lot of contradictions. India has no relation to countries around it. Pakistan is religiously against progress. It's very different to China that imposes its authoritarianism on more than 1 billion people, or Myanmar, which is the ethnic policy against the Rohingya. And of course, it's not up to us to decide whether this law is constitutional or not. What the EU has to do is make sure that it avoids conflict with a country such as India. India is at the vanguard. It's got excellent education, especially when it comes to STEM. Now, India is fully aware of the domestic and external threats to its security. It's just trying to act and implement the measures that they think are necessary.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Bennion, for 1 minute. The floor is yours.
Well, I certainly welcome the idea of a Citizenship Amendment Act in offering protection for persecuted groups. Unfortunately, the Act as it stands is seriously flawed. The law does not extend to the protection of Muslims. Now, there are Muslim sects in neighbouring countries that do face discrimination, and one of them, the Ahmadiyas, has already been mentioned. Ultimately, this law discriminates on religious grounds and is therefore contrary to the whole principle in India of secularism and also its obligations under international human rights law. Now, the danger, if this Act is applied alongside the requirements of the National Register of Citizens, many Muslims could be deemed stateless if they cannot produce the correct documentation. Now, this is already proving to be an issue in Assam, where it's already been stated by Mr Mohammed. There's, I think, 1.9 million people now have been excluded from the register on the basis of not having the documents. So India's refugee policy needs to apply to all of those in need, including Muslims, and the government should ensure that security forces show sufficient restraint towards protesters and are held to account for their excessive use of force. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to France Jamet for 1 minute.
Oui, Madame.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, no country in the world would agree that it's not allowed to control its borders. India is a sovereign country which has a prerogative to decide who is eligible to request nationality. All the more reason because the national cohesion within the country and outside the country are at risk. India is a democracy. We've heard it again and again here. It's the biggest democracy in the world, a federation where the states have a crucial importance in many an increasing number of areas. There are hundreds of thousands of migrants coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan and elsewhere. It's not just a humanitarian issue, it's a challenge to the unity of a country that's already fragile. India has more than 1.3 billion people in its population. And we've seen so many times in its history, it's been subject to divisions. It now wants to take its place in the world so that the United Nations appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Bernhard Zimniok.
Pan Bernhard Zimniok. Nieobecny.
He's not in the room. So now we move on to the catch the eye procedure. Silvia Sardone for 1 minute.
Nieobecna.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. I find it very disconcerting that for the umpteenth time here in the European Parliament, we find ourselves talking about other countries, calling into question the fact that they're sovereign. We're also calling into question a country such as India, which is seen as a great democracy, especially in Asia. Now, between February and in February and in March, the European Parliament and European leaders will speak to Indian leaders, and this issue is currently before the Supreme Court. So should we really call into question the ties between India and the EU when this is an issue that pertains to domestic politics? I think that European citizens voted for us so we could come here and talk about the big problems they face and not to talk about Indians or other states. There are attacks against the government. Here there are references to the internet being shut down, but it is pretty clear that we'll be voting against this as a group.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Vice President of the European Commission, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Madam Dalli.
Madam President and honourable members, I have taken due note of the various opinions expressed by you today. It's okay. The EU values its partnership with India. May I reiterate this? It's a respected democracy, the largest in the world and the oldest in Asia, and we look forward to pursue and intensify our dialogue with India at the forthcoming summit on the whole range of issues of common interest, including our mutual commitment to democracy, the rule of law and human rights. I thank you and good night.
Bardzo dziękuję, pani komisarz.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, I've received 6 draft resolutions concluding this debate. This debate is closed and the vote shall take place during the second parliamentary session in March.